So, I was thinking the other day.
Always dangerous.
Always dangerous. So, Liz Truss.
I wasn't expecting that as the next word.
Wasn't it? So, was it the Daily Star? I'm sure our listeners will be familiar with that publication that did the lettuce thing.
Yeah, they came up with lettuce.
I think it was them that came up with the lettuce and will it last longer than the Liz Truss.
Yeah.
So it got me thinking the other day, if you took Starmer and Rachel Reeves, what vegetable would outlast them, and why? Trick question.
You are really trying to draw me into political territory here, are you not? Well, I think given the size of the majority he's got, and his sworn support for Ms. Reeves, and the fact that inflation did come down in December, and we've had a little notch of growth, I think she's been saved by the skin of her teeth.
I'll let you put this vegetable in the fridge as well. So you can,
a potato.
Potato, yeah. So I was going to sprout.
Sprout?
Yeah.
Do they last long?
I don't know.
Starmer the sprout. Nice bit of alliteration.
Yeah, that could.
Reeves the radish. They probably last a long time.
They probably last. I think it's probably because I was cleaning out my fridge the other day. There was some.
You're thinking I need some vegetable
there
metaphors.
There was a lot of vegetables going on. A lot of vegetables.
Do you paint little faces on them or something? You've got a little family of vegetables in your fridge.
there was some that needed to be disposed of. Shall we put it that way?
You've done a bit of a spring clean.
We have indeed. So just got me thinking. It's just one of those things I was musing. I thought, I wonder what
on earth triggered that thought? Liz Truss and lettuces. That's years ago.
It's not that long ago, is it? It's within living memory.
I'm trying to pretend it's long time ago. I'm trying to expunge it from my memory. All right.
Well,
on that.
So write in, listeners, if you have a vegetable that you think.
You'd like to suggest a vegetable. To associate with the political leaders of the day.
Exactly.
Based on how long you think they'll last.
How long do you think they'll last? Tomato, too soon. Cucumber.
Well, you're in lettuce territory there, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, I think there was talk of the lettuce. They were going to get a. What's the cos? Is it the cos?
Yeah,
what's
or a little gem.
Or romaine lettuce or something for Miss Reeves.
This has got to be one of the more bizarre intro chats we've had to one of our podcasts. So thank you for that. You've certainly lightened the mood. But I think we should start a podcast.
Start being serious, yes.
We should. Well, I don't know about that, but start a podcast. So, hello and welcome to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. It's me and Rich again, and we're trying to talk about something that might be useful and or interesting. Be great if it was both for owners and managers of small and medium-sized enterprises. So, hello, Rich.
Hello.
We're back again.
Back again, yep.
Episode 104. Doesn't sound quite as exciting when you just passed 100, does it?
No.
If we were on 199 now, it'd be, but 104, it's just 104. 252s. Yeah, there's not a lot in it.
252, so playing darts or something, isn't it?
Is that? Can you do 104? We should do that every week. Is this week's episode number a darts finish? Can you do a 3-dart finish on 104? I'm sure you can. 2 balls and a double 2 for a start. There's got to be a better way of doing that. Yeah. Double top, triple 20, double 2. There'll be someone who can do some double 16s in there.
Yeah.
32. Anyway, so
yeah, he's off. Come back.
So yeah, we're going to do a podcast this week on manufacturing, or in particular, the challenges of growing manufacturing. So how to grow your manufacturing business using HubSpot. That's our particular angle on it, isn't it? That's where we'll go. So that's what we'll come back to in a minute and do in this week's podcast. But quick review of how did we get here? Last few episodes. What did we do last week?
103, that was... I can't actually read it.
Ambitious people. Don't necessarily promote ambitious people.
Yeah.
So that was based on an HBR article, sort of from Stanford University research, actually, which showed that ambition doesn't correlate particularly well to leadership ability.
And definitely don't promote someone that can't read their own handwriting.
Have you ever been promoted?
It says, not to my knowledge, it says something like dot oinking paint or something.
Yeah, that says ambitious people, doesn't it? You've abbreviated that. So last week we talked about the dangers of promoting ambitious people and the other traits of leadership. It turned quite philosophical. That was quite interesting. The week before that got philosophical as well. Goals that matter, goals that make a difference.
That did actually, didn't it? They got a bit esoteric.
We started out just thinking, beginning of the year, let's talk about goals. Yeah. And suddenly you were going on to the meaning of life and long-term, short-term and all sorts.
I can't help myself.
So that really did. That was very interesting, though. That's very good.
Yeah.
That's some good feedback.
We got into the why of it all, didn't you? It's always a good place to end up.
Exactly,
the why.
Now, what did we do at the beginning of January? 2nd of January was our first episode this year.
Referral, how to build a referral network.
How to build a referral network. Yeah, very good. Systemising it, wasn't it?
Yeah, systemising a referral network. So it's not just about... Yeah.
I've started doing even more on ours on that one. So, yeah, we're categorising various contacts as whether they are referrers or not, and if so, at what sort of level. How often do we need to go out of our way to contact them? And then you find that actually some of that happens the other way around. Your referrers contact you. So you think, well, I need to record that then because that's another interaction point.
I hit my target for selling Tupperware this week as well. So
you didn't set yourself a big target, did you?
It's not that kind of referral network before people get worried that we've got some multi-level marketing.
Multi-level marketing, yeah.
Scam going
Not
on.
Into that. No, referrals, so nurturing your referrers.
Yeah,
your advocates.
and trying to quantify that in terms of relational proximity and those sorts of things.
Yeah, so they were the last three. All doing very well, so thanks again everybody for spreading the word on YouTube and Spotify and Apple and however else you're doing it.
Yep.
Thank you very much for that. And thanks also for a lovely email we got this week. Well, it wasn't an email, it was a contact form on our website, wasn't it?
It was indeed.
From a loyal listener who was telling us how much he appreciated our dulcet tones every week, just to be basically sympathise and empathise, I think, with the journey of a business owner. Certainly in a small business, it can be a lonely place. So yeah, we're on your side. We've been there. We've done it. We work with lots of people like that. So it's nice to know that whatever we talk about each week is of some use to various people out there listening, looking for different things.
Yep, it's always nice to hear that, isn't it? A bit of encouragement.
Yeah.
Keep going. Keep going to episode 105.
Yeah, I think we'll make it to 105. So thanks a lot for that feedback. Very kind. So, go on then. Why you chose this week's subject? Why did you choose that?
We work with a lot of manufacturing businesses.
We do.
Manufacturing businesses are very close to our hearts, we could say. You have an awful lot of experience running manufacturing businesses.
Do you think those 2 points are linked?
I think they may be.
Maybe. I don't think it's deliberate. I think it's just I've got a tremendously strong empathy for manufacturers and what a bloody tough time they have. And I suppose the reputation of it being the dirtier end of business. And having been there, you know, I feel their pain. So yeah, I was in manufacturing. That's what I did before I did podcasts for a living. No, seriously, my first factory, I was 27. I was given a factory in Manchester, 60 people, 3 unions, pretty industrial action at our sister plant and all sorts of stuff. So that was a trial by fire in at the deep end. Then I ran a factory up in Scotland, which was pretty tough, right on the border between Rangers and Celtic supporting countries. So, in fact, wherever I've run a factory, it's been between 2 rival football teams.
Ah.
So it's caused me a bit of grief. Yeah, exactly.
Peacemaker.
So I ran a massive continuous engineering process up there. It was phenomenal. And then what brought me to Shropshire was running an automotive supply company, 350 people. Injection molding and all sorts. So yeah, I've seen firsthand the challenges of running a manufacturing company, and I think what we're going to cover today about the challenges of growing on really resonate, because some of the behaviours you see within manufacturing companies are pretty old-fashioned, and it's very traditional. It's very difficult to break out of that. So I think that's why when you suggested this, I thought that'd be a good idea.
And I think there's something about it. I mean, my background is not necessarily manufacturing, but having worked with you for a number of years now, been involved in it, there is something about just making stuff, isn't there? That is you and you. There's nothing, and then there's something.
Yeah.
And there's an element of that happens in the service industry, but there's a little bit intangible about it.
You can't touch it.
But when you see some of the engineering that goes into some of the things that our clients make, it's crazy sometimes that people can figure out how to make this stuff. And then
I used to get great satisfaction on a Friday afternoon going down to the dispatch bay and just standing there watching the last wagon of the week being loaded up. That's what it is. I think we've done that. Between us all, look at that. We've just filled a wagon of stuff that someone's buying from us. It's a tremendously satisfying feeling, which you just don't get in the service industry at all. So yeah, it's a very different type of world to live in. Yeah, definitely.
So I suppose we're working a lot with manufacturing businesses. We're seeing the challenges that they have. We're also working a lot with HubSpot and seeing the opportunities that creates to help address some of those challenges. So we thought, well, why don't we marry those two together and maybe come up with something useful for people?
Yeah, and I think it's welcomed in lots of the manufacturing companies, not least the ones we work with, of course, that's why we're working with them. But you get a lot of reasonably technically minded people within manufacturing companies, and they like systems, they like order, databases, data, managing by facts. It's kind of bred into you that's the way you run it. You don't just guess stuff all the time and go on hunches. You have to rely on that sort of thing. So if you bring someone a tool that they can then hang lots of those thoughts on and use, it's generally welcomed with open arms, really. There's no resistance. It's usually the challenge is getting them to take long enough to listen in the first place to realize that there's a really powerful tool here, but it will take a bit of time to just stop what you're doing and pause for a minute, see if we can do it this other way, especially around that front end, around the whole go-to-market, RevOps type stuff.
So from your experience, what sort of challenges do you think manufacturers face? What are they up against?
Well, I think the problem with growing a manufacturing company generally is, first and foremost, they tend to be quite stable and very reliant on their existing customers. I would say that's number one. They don't tend to have very well-developed go-to-market strategies. They've just got a lot of regular customers. When they do go to market, they've got very long sales cycles. You can't just bring someone up on their bike next week. They've got complex decision-making processes inside the buyers. You usually have to wait for the right CapEx approvals. You might need board approval. You probably do risk assessments internally. All sorts of investment appraisal processes you've got to go through. The stakeholder relationships are very complex. You're not selling to one person, you're selling to a variety of different people, all with different needs. So you might be having to get the FD on board one minute, the engineering director on the next, facilities management, health and safety, commercial, all sorts of different people. And you've got to craft your message differently for each of them if you're doing that. And that's a complexity that a lot of people don't quite see. The decision-making process itself is quite opaque. I think people probably have traditional suppliers that they stick to just because they've been there all along, so it's harder for somebody to break into. And I think there's a mindset in manufacturers that they believe the propaganda that their customers push onto them, that they're just selling a commodity. I can get what you make from somebody else. You're a machinist, you're a maker of these plastic parts. And so unless you really work out what's your value proposition and how are you adding something different to the competitor, you're not just selling a widget. And there was I showed you the other day, a good example of someone on Instagram showing how Nike would market themselves if they were a manufacturer. Yeah. Talking about, how many extra millimeters of height of heel they would have, or how much it improves someone's comfort when running. They don't market, they market on emotion, don't they? And they're selling a lifestyle, nothing to do with the features of the product. But manufacturers always focus on, the features rather than the benefits. And even then, talk about the product itself rather than the service around it, and the fact that we can solve your problem rather than we can sell you a thing.
I think that's an interesting junction to maybe bring in some HubSpot stuff, because say sometimes like with Nike, that is a clearly emotional, you can attach emotion to that, maybe not easily, but you can see how that happens. Yeah, you're achieving a goal. If you're selling a widget or something, it can often be quite hard, and I think a lot of businesses struggle with this, and we used to do a reasonable amount of content for companies, manufacturers, and it was always quite a challenge to work out, well, how do you attach purpose to just making a spare part for something or whatever, but actually that whole piece around, well, how do you actually really just deliver this really well? How do you make sure your customer service is amazing? How do you make sure that your sales process really works? How do you get excellence in all of those processes that make the business run? And that's where we're seeing actually a system like HubSpot can really bring a lot of benefit. And this is not to sit here and kind of just get all salesy about it, but it's the world that we're living in at the moment, and we're seeing lots of kind of applications for companies. Yeah,
clearly we're going to have more knowledge, aren't we, of how HubSpot can solve these things, but other CRMs are available, other systems are available. Having a systemized approach helps. We just happen to know that HubSpot is quite an accessible one for the types of sizes of companies that we work with. And it's very flexible, which is why we do it. No, you're absolutely right. There's and that whole point about selling the emotion. I think it must be. It's easy when you're a smaller or medium-sized company to say it's easy for big companies to do that. You know, Intel went for Intel Inside, and it meant something. You know, Apple, when they sell their products, aren't selling the product as much as the lifestyle. You know, I'll pay probably 2 or 3 times as much for my Apple product as a competitor, because I've somehow bought into that whole, whether it be Steve Jobs' dream or Apple dream or whatever it is. Nike are just selling training shoes.
Yeah.
You can get training shoes from anybody, or a T-shirt with a swoosh on it. But they've got you to think about it in a very different way. So it is easier, I suppose, for those big companies that have spent billions on their brand. How do you do that if you make, you know, coat hangers out of an injection molding machine, or you turn up metal parts so they become small metal pins that get used in some other bigger machine? How do you sell the emotion of that? Well, it's not around the product, that's for sure. You know, my coat hanger is better than your coat hanger. But if you've got someone at the end of the day whose business relies on it, you've got to persuade them that you understand their business and you're solving whatever problem they may have. It could be supply chain, it could be on-time deliveries, it could be quality, it could be cost, I don't know. But you've got to really show that you understand what value you bring, and it's not, you know, just a nice product itself.
So some of these challenges then that manufacturers face, we take one such as, you know, the long sales cycle we talked about before. Yeah. How can they, what's your kind of advice on?
Well, I think feeding off that problem, if you've got a very long sales cycle process, it's going to be a lot easier to forget stuff that happened a long time ago, or even not that long ago. And especially if you've got a change of personnel internally, or it's just someone else picks up that job because someone else was busy on something else, or they're on maternity leave or whatever it may be. So you need good record keeping. And something I've seen in lots of companies that haven't yet fully embraced CRM is they're relying an awful lot on data being kept in salespeople's email inboxes, in their phones, maybe in spreadsheets, handwritten notes, or more often than not in someone's head. Now, you can survive to a certain point. You can probably run a business up to, say, 5 million turnover, maybe even 10 million turnover, if you've only got 1 or 2 salespeople getting that far. But as soon as you break out of that, and to be able to break out of that, you've got to have some better system than that.
Yeah.
So at least have a CRM, and if you just choose the cheapest one you can find, you know, use the free version of HubSpot. As I said before, it's a blinking good system for given that it's free, or even the £14 a month starter one. You know, these are reasonably, very accessible systems that do a job. If nothing else, just get it logged down, record all the interactions, record all those emails that are relevant, the phone calls, the meetings and all of that, and just be able to track that back. And if, especially later on in a process, when you're starting to get into the negotiation stage of a deal, then be able to refer back to your notes from maybe sometimes a year ago. There's some deals we came up with recently that have taken 6 years to come to fruition. You know, you don't start out with a new deal thinking this is going to take 6 years to complete, so I'll start taking notes. You think in all faith it'll close in 3 months. Yeah. But other stuff happens, right? You just got, you know, budgets change and other priorities come up, and eventually it can come back. So you need to go back to it. So yeah, first and foremost, just have a system. To cope with a long sales cycle, have a system, make records, write stuff down, get it so that anybody involved in that process can share it. Yeah. So if nothing else, use the stages, you know, the pipeline stages or whatever it is that HubSpot would call them for deal management.
Another challenge potentially as well is the complexity of the buyer journey, and that will probably vary by, well, it can vary on a deal basis. It can also vary on a business-to-business basis. Yeah. But from a manufacturing perspective, do you think that it's a particularly complex buyer journey, or?
Well, it can be, but as you say, you may have differences even within one company, depending on what you're selling them. So if you're selling spare parts for whatever you did, that might be a reasonably simple sales process. It could even be that it could be transactional. It could be that you're not having to facilitate that much at all. And usually if someone needs a spare part, certainly in a breakdown situation, but even if they're just replenishing stock levels of critical spares, then they're likely to be happy ringing up your customer internal salespeople saying, can I place an order for part number ABC123? And it gets delivered and invoiced, and that's that. So it can be a very, very simple process. On the other hand, if you're doing something that's certainly got a big price tag or is very critical to someone else's process, then there's going to be all sorts of different things going on, which could well involve not just from your point of view, qualification, discovery call type stuff up front, but really scoping out what it is that the problems are and how you might do it, a solution design phase that may end up with prototyping. You might have to do a demonstration. You might then have to do various tweaks around that, and then you might have to prove supply chains. You might have to run at rate type testing to show that you can keep up with production rate. It can get very complicated, and if you're into automotive, you'll have to do APQP, which is sort of quality proving. or first article inspection stuff if you're in aerospace, all these sort of things that you have to jump through hoops for. So if you've built your sales process to allow for all of those things, then you can monitor how the deal goes through that as a journey. And sometimes it'll go backwards a bit and you have to go through a solution design phase again or whatever. So just don't get overwhelmed by the fact that the process can be complex. Just break it down into the steps that it may take and then move your deal through that, graphically on the Kanban style view, if you like. Just drag the deal through the various stages. Get it to trigger whatever it is, activities you need to take at each stage. Make sure you're recording the outcomes of that. Just record the evidence as you go along. It'll stand you in good stead.
There's something we hear quite a bit from business owners, MDs, that where is the visibility of all my data?
Yeah.
You're saying there, you've got complex buying cycles, you've got complex buy journeys, you've got lengthy sales cycles. There's a lot of data. What's going, and that could just be for one deal. You could have hundreds of deals going through your pipeline at any one time.
Yeah.
How do you maintain that visibility? How do you look at, well, what have I actually got in terms of pipeline value, pipeline cover, revenue forecasting, salesperson activity, all of those sorts of things. So is there any good examples we can think of where we've seen that work really well? I know we've got a couple of projects at the moment where we're seeing people, it seems to be a bit of a focus. How do I get a handle on all this information?
Yeah, sure. And when it comes to that point of the year where you have to put the budgets together for the following year, before you have this sort of solution, you'll probably take last year's numbers and add a couple of percent, the lowest number you think you can get away with without getting sacked, but without giving yourself too stretching a target. And that tends to be how it works. Whereas given that you've got this long sales cycle, in a way that plays in your favour in this respect, because you can use your order intake and earlier activities as being a lead indicator. So if you really are very good at monitoring the rate at which you're creating new deals, especially if you can value them, even with an estimate at the beginning, then you can monitor that. What's our rate of creating new deals and what multiple of our sales target does that have to be?
Yeah.
So it's a bit like the pipeline cover measure.
Yeah.
How many more times our sales target does our new inquiry deal creation number have to be?
Yeah.
And then beyond that, once you've done that, what about our quoting? At least our value of quotes issued, that's a pretty robust number, right? We've had to agree a price. So you can believe that. Once again, it will need to be a multiple of our sales target based on what our win rate may be. And monitor your win rates. Are we aware of where that differs? Segment your win rates by different sectors. Yeah. How many times are you being asked to be the third quote and you never win it? Certain customers are always asking for quotes and never award you the work. Or it's when you're up against a certain competitor versus not up against that certain competitor that you win more or less and understand that. So lots of that sort of thing. I would say that's still part of the dashboard design, and there's a whole other episode in that, I think, about how to measure the process, the progress of a sales process.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a science and an art combined, I think, that, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right.
I think there really is.
Manage by fact and understand where the variances may be misleading you, but don't just put your finger in the air and say, we'll sell what we did last year plus 10%.
I don't know if we've talked about this before, or when you mentioned earlier about selling to the same customers. And maybe that's a little, is that a variant on a niche in a market, or just you've got the same lot of customers that you've had? Like say, a lot of manufacturing companies tend to or can fall into the trap of letting the work come to them. We've seen that a number of times where maybe because of reputation or just because of that relationship tends to be a more kind of relational type of business.
I think you've got two or three factors coming together here, which is what causes this problem, where manufacturers don't tend to have very well developed go-to-market strategies and they're relying too much on existing customers. One of them is that it can be quite sticky to change suppliers if you're a customer. So you're not looking to chop and change all the time. You might have to go through reapprovals of stuff, automotive or especially in aerospace. Once you've chosen a supplier, it takes so long to get a new one approved, you're not going to do it. Lots of other manufacturers don't have to go through that pain, but nevertheless, it's a pain. So moving around is sticky anyway. So because companies tend to have the same customers, they tend to rely on having the same customers. So that is certainly one factor. Another factor is, I think, a lot of people who are attracted to working in a manufacturing environment tend to be very techie and drawn to the product and the process and all that. And therefore, you don't always get the types that are more happy doing outbound cold calling, if you like, prospecting, customer acquisition type stuff. And you see this even if you go to exhibitions that manufacturers are at. You tend to have a lot of looking at your shoes or Or even if people are busy on the stands in an exhibition, they're busy talking to their existing customers.
Yeah.
And it's really just a bit of a shindig to maintain relationships rather than to really explore the market they're not selling to. So it's this combination of being, potentially a bit more reserved than people in other industries, as well as it being quite sticky and difficult to change suppliers. It just means that everybody gets comfortable doing what they're doing. And actually, if you lose a customer because they've been taken over or they've been bought out or purchasing strategy changes, you've got to be on the front foot. You've got to be out there trying to find new people. And what about if your markets are changing?
Yeah.
If you're supplying parts for combustion engine vehicles at the moment, there will be discussions going on in your board meetings about what's the future of our company come post 2030 when no one can buy a new diesel car anymore, or whatever that date ends up being. Have you already worked out how you're going to supply parts to electric vehicles? But if you're selling pistons, you're not going to be selling any of them to electric vehicles.
Yeah.
So what else can you use your skill set to do, and where else are you going? So that's where you need to be going to new companies all the time and trying to find ways of using your skills and processes and people.
I remember someone was talking about pilot light salespeople that never go out, and it was always that.
Yes, that old joke.
And that's that old classic. But I suppose there can be a bit of a trap of that, can't there, if people get comfortable and.
Yeah, and that's another thing about manufacturers as well. As much as they may well be, characterise them, sweeping generalisation there about being generally more internally technically focused, and the pilot light, the ones that never go out. Paradoxically, the ones where you can build up a relationship by visiting in person are much more successful.
Yeah.
And we found that, and impressed upon our HubSpot contacts as well, that if you're trying to sell into a manufacturing company in particular, and I'm sure this is true for other companies as well, go and see them.
Yeah.
Just get in front of them, shake their hand, have a cup of coffee, show them that you care. And, the best thing you can ever do is ask for a tour of someone's shop floor. Everybody loves what they're making.
Yeah.
And you may not need to actually see it to help deliver your service, but indirectly you do. You've got to understand what their challenges are.
Yeah.
So take your safety shoes with you, take your safety glasses in case you need them, wander around the shop floor and take an interest. What are you making here? How do you do that? It's you learn a lot.
Yeah, it's always fascinating. I was always fascinated seeing how stuff's made. Just things you just think, how do they do that?
Yeah.
Just be curious, isn't it? I suppose that's the thing. Go in there, be curious, ask questions.
Good tip. Yeah.
And have a little look about.
Yeah. Have a gander.
Have a gander.
Yeah.
So, any other challenges then for
well, we talked a lot there about the selling end,
side,
how to drive it. I think manufacturers have lots of other systems in place anyway, because it's a very complex beast, a manufacturing company. You'll have quality systems to manage things like NCRs, non-conforming reports, calibration records. Maybe you've got another system for managing all your lifting gear and all of that. You'll probably have another system to look after the maintenance programs, both preventative, predictive, breakdown stuff, where you spare parts. So you'll have different systems for all those things. You've probably got an MRP system, which helps you manage bills of materials and routings, and maybe capacity planning and all that sort of thing. So you'll have lots of other specialist systems. The reason I mention all of that is because within the context of some of our clients, where perhaps they haven't got such a degree of complexity that they need a full-blown specialist system for that, you can actually find ways of using either HubSpot in its own right, with custom objects and building databases within it, or finding other perfectly good third-party pieces of software that will do those things, but integrate them really nicely into HubSpot. So classic case at the moment, we've got a client that does a lot of service engineer work, and they're always scheduling their service engineers to go out either for breakdowns or scheduled service. They've got a really neat third-party piece of software that manages all of that, does it really well, monitors vehicles and who's got the spares in their vehicles and which customer needs what and all that stuff. And it just integrates really, really nicely with HubSpot. So there's no harm with having some other systems around or even building them within HubSpot. Just make sure you've got a single source of the truth and you can access it all in one place. And it just makes everybody's life so much easier. That's what RevOps is really about, isn't it? Taking everything from early stage marketing, finding strangers, right through the whole sales process, win the order, onboard the client, deliver the stuff, and then do after sales and look after it. Get everybody joined up and get the data in the right place. I think there's some other stuff as well, isn't it? We're talking about with HubSpot. You've been doing some things around revenue forecasting. Exactly.
And integrating that into capacity planning.
Well, and that's what I say. You may well have other systems to do that sort of thing, but actually, once you've got the order in a HubSpot type system, so you know what the total value of it will be, it's not really any use after the sale to just know that that's the total amount. What you really need to know is when will that be delivered and when will it be invoiced, and those two things may not align either. You may invoice quite a lot up front for engineering and design work, but then there's a dribble of parts that go out for months and months, if not years afterwards. So being able to have properties for those types of bits of data, when am I going to ship these parts, or in what chunks am I going to bill it, then we can create other objects that create records for that sort of thing and report on it. And when aggregated, that becomes very, very valuable. You can start doing revenue forecasting, like you say, which the sales guys love then, because we're not having to just apply a blanket 3-month delay from order intake until invoicing. We can do it in detail. And especially where we're starting to work in some of our clients on the shipping part of that, when will the bits go out? You can almost do the job of a fairly medium-sized sort of MRP system, just to say, actually, I'm going to need these parts in June, and that's going to be a big, busy month. You may take an order in March that isn't for delivery until September, but you know that at the point of taking the order, so forecast it. And there's a certain amount we can do, and we have done, as you say, with some of the clever tricks we've developed.
What about, it would be remiss not to mention AI in manufacturing? Where's that heading? Because there's an awful lot of AI being built into HubSpot now. There's an awful lot of AI tools. You cannot go a day on Instagram or YouTube or whatever without being bombarded with AI and all of that. What's your hot take on that?
It's interesting, isn't it? Well, up until very recently, the buzzword in manufacturing was Industry 4.0.
Yeah.
Right? And have you heard that in the last year? It's almost evaporated, and I'm sure there's still people working on it, but that's the idea of Internet of Things and everything being on the internet connected, so you've got condition monitoring of everything. Well, imagine that's just now taken for granted, and that somehow or other all processes are being monitored. You've got a massive amount of data to the point where no bunch, even a reasonably sized engineering department in a company, couldn't possibly be able to analyze all that information enough. But imagine with all that information in there, just in their sort of data lake, as they would call it, you then apply AI to it. Perhaps you can work out that the chances of a machine failing happen to have some distant relation to whenever that product was run in these conditions, or that went wrong, or vibration went up on this, which caused this quality problem. All these sort of potential maybe correlations that you can only hypothesize at, suddenly AI would surface for you. So it's about having massive amounts of data available to you, but then having another tool to analyze it, rather than just put them on a graph and see if you can get some sort of line to go through the dots. We're way beyond that now.
And it's not just in the production side as well, is it? So there's a whole load of AI around sales, marketing, which manufacturing companies can potentially leverage to maybe make up for some of those things we talked about before, those challenges around sales cycles, complex buyer journeys. We haven't even touched on kind of inbound versus outbound, but that whole kind of...
and if you're going to go more outbound, which is what I'm advocating by criticising those companies that tend to rely too much on their existing customers rather than prospecting, then a way around that is to use some AI to help you. It's just it's a tool, isn't it? Like anything else, like the reason they call it a co-pilot. It works with you, not for you. But imagine if, and one of the HubSpot tools that's coming out and quite popular at the moment is this prospecting agent they've got, where once you've identified some markets you want to get into, it will run off and do the research for you. It'll crawl web pages and blogs and social posts, and it will craft those outgoing messages for you to be able to ideally email to start with, but then maybe ring them up and use that same sort of information in it. So there's so many tools now that will help you do that sort of stuff. So it's a lot easier than it used to be, where all that research would have taken somebody in sales department to do. That's all done for you, straight out of the box. So fewer and fewer excuses for not doing it.
So future's bright then for manufacturing?
Well, it's been predicted to be failing for a long time, hasn't it? Because the percentage of our workforce that's involved in manufacturing has gone down a lot from its heyday. But what's left is quite stable, because I think we've got rid of the lower value commodity type and low value added stuff. And what we're left with now is really high value added specialist types of manufacturing, not just the things that have to be made locally, just because of either shelf life or transport costs, but things that are really rely on the knowledge base that we have from a very talented engineering pool in the UK to be able to make it. But we're always going to be wanting to do food and anything that relies on those sorts of delivery times, anything that's bulky. We'll always have a reasonable size part of our economy. It's about a sixth of our economy still in industry totally. Manufacturing is a subset of that. So yeah, it's an interesting sphere to be working in. Yeah. And as you said at the beginning, because of my background in it, I have a tremendous empathy for manufacturers and their challenges. And I'd love to be able to go in and show them some of these new tools and help them to grow.
Tremendous opportunities, isn't there? Even though they've got these challenges, there's that heritage, like you say, of standing on the shoulders of giants and just some great manufacturing companies around doing some amazing things, technological expertise combined with now all these tools, sales and marketing, outreach, AI, etc., etc. There's quite a potent combination potentially for companies if they really grab hold of this, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think you're seeing that as somebody new comes in, especially that new broom, maybe the next generation takes over in commercial director or whatever, the chief sales officer or whatever you call it. They're coming in with a different approach. Yeah. They're saying, right, come on, let's take a different stance here, not just keep going to the same old exhibitions and ring up the same old people and have a golf day with the same people. Let's do something different. Yeah. And when you bring in a new system, it changes your thinking. It really challenges your mindset. And I think that's when you start to get a lot more creative and you'll see some of those results coming through.
Amazing. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you for your questions. Very good. Well, thank you again for listening to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. Just another take on something that we find interesting or useful, and hopefully you as owners and managers of small and medium-sized enterprises do. And this week, in particular, manufacturers and those struggling to grow their manufacturing businesses. Share the word of what we're doing. Please pass on our link of anything that you found of ours on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever. Send an email, tell your mate in the pub, and in the meantime, good luck with your business.